The worst year for a lot of us for our mental as well as physical health. So joining us this morning is best-selling author, coach, and fitness expert, Lisa Goldenthal.
Hello and welcome. I'm Lisa G, your host. You're at the top of your game, yet the game is changing faster than ever. Strategies that got you here aren't the ones that'll keep you here. The pressure is relentless, and the fear of obsolescence looms large. That's why I'm here. Welcome to the new podcast series, Disrupted: How to Be Gritty and Unlock Performance. This is your chance where I sit down with today's tops in business, mindset, wellness, and success to help you master disruption and thrive.
Thanks for coming, and I'll see you soon.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to WholeCEO with Lisa G. Today, I'm excited to introduce a distinguished executive coach and consultant known for her expertise in neuroscience-based change management. Dr. Moran has been a pivotal figure in guiding both Fortune 500 companies and innovative startups through successful transformations. Her practical and effective strategies are detailed in her Amazon bestselling book, Forward: Leading Your Team Through Change, which has equipped leaders globally to navigate the complexities of organizational shifts. Before founding Elizabeth Moran Transformation, Dr. Moran served as Vice President of Global Leader Team and Organization Development at ADP, and she has held significant talent development roles at prestigious organizations such as Bloomberg, Lehman Brothers, Getty Images, and Time Inc. Her academic background is equally impressive, holding a doctorate in clinical psychology from the California Institute of Integral Studies and International Coaching Federation, along with being a certified neurotransformational coach. She's committed to personal development, social impact, and I'm so excited to welcome someone who's been featured in CEO World. She's helped inmates, aiding incarcerated men and women in leading more fulfilling lives. Welcome to the podcast, Dr. Elizabeth Moran.
Thank you, Lisa. I was excited to come here because, again, I see that we have some interest in the transformation. So thanks so much for having me.
Thank you for being here. It was just so impressive, all of that bio. And I really am interested in this neuroscience. And could we talk about our brains and change and your key neuroscience concepts that counter resistance to change? Because everybody knows we all want to change, and then up comes that resistance.
Yes, from us or other people. So well said. So a couple of things. I've been interested in change work my whole life, probably because it's frustrating and interesting, hence humans. So my goal in writing the book or coming forward was threefold. One is, how do I reduce the complexity and make change management manageable? Because inside organizations, any leader I ever worked with thought, yeah, I need to do something different when I lead through change, but I don't really know how to do it. So it's very complex. So that's one. Two, grounding it in neuroscience, which we can absolutely get into. And three, it was using strengths. So how do people realize that they're already change experts? They've learned from things that have worked and haven't worked. And so how do you combine that? So I think that's sort of my unique offering, is titrating down what are the key things. And then specifically, the book is really a practical guide to help leaders deal with the emotional side of change, tough reactions and questions, which in my experience, many leaders struggle with the most.
Well, why don't we delve into your neuroscience, in particular with the emotional problems that come up with change? Because obviously, if change worked without any resistance, we'd all make our resolutions January 1st and be changed by February 1st, 15th, but that doesn't happen, does it?
No, it doesn't happen, despite all those things. And so, yes, so I have 5 concepts I've pulled out that I think are particularly important for change leaders. And so we can talk a little bit about each and then we can delve deeper. I always say there's a little asterisk next to this section simply because we're learning so much, not only about what the brain does, but the connection between the heart and brain. So these things are changing all the time. So grounding the work in neuroscience, and everybody loves the neuroscience, right? So if you're someone who's had more of an emotional, empathy, compassionate bent in how you look at the world, you're going to be like, yeah, duh, right? So good. Neuroscience confirms what I already experience. And people who have more of an analytic or engineering background love it because it's like, oh, you mean this emotional stuff isn't just fluff. So it's a way for people to understand it. Okay. First concept that is really important is this idea of threat of uncertainty. So our brains hate uncertainty more than anything. Quick story. When I was doing a course for inmates, I developed a personal growth class for inmates, as you mentioned. I remember there was one gentleman in particular who was always so downtrodden and never really interacted. And then I came in one day and he was all excited. And I thought, I knew he was awaiting sentencing. And I thought, oh, he must have gotten good news. And so he came up to me. He's like, Elizabeth, guess what? And I was like, what? He's like, I got 30 years. I was like, thank you. That's what I was like, is my face doing what your face is doing
Oh
right
my
now?
gosh. Yeah. In case
Right?
you're not watching us on video, that's
Right.
not good news.
No, but for him, it drove home like he had an answer. The uncertainty was so much worse than the information,
Oh,
right? And so that's ultimately our brains hate uncertainty. So
wow.
that's one thing. What we know about that is that there was this also fascinating study done that if people are already in uncertainty, 75% of the time they confuse uncertainty with something bad. And if you think about that, that's a big deal. So if people aren't clear, they're really uncertain, they're usually going to make up a story that doesn't have a good ending, let's just say 75% of the time. So that's the first thing leaders need to understand is, hence any communication, even letting people know, I hear you,
Yeah.
and I know that's a great question. We don't have an answer. So clarity is really important. One.
Yeah.
Two, negativity bias is another one.
Hmm.
Really, and that says that our brains give at least 3 times more psychological weight to the negative than the positive. So when we are experiencing something that is unknown or a change, right, we're instantly 3 times more likely to think it's going to be negative. Now, we're taking all of our past experience, but this is hardwired. This is survival. And this is also mostly problematic in organizations because there are a few people who make the change decision. And so most of the time leaders in their teams who have to implement a change, they didn't come up with it. And we all know change is a much better idea when it's your idea. Right?
Yeah.
So that's
When you're dealing with leaders.
yeah, so you hope it's your idea, but most of the time it's not in organizations. That's how changes come down. So the negativity bias is understanding that people are going to resist and react, and that's normal. So resistance is frustrating, yes, for the leader, but it's not a problem. So the third concept is optimism, which is a beautiful one. And what we know is that people, and it's not about ignoring challenges or difficulties. Using optimism is really about a way to help free people whose brain is stuck in that negativity bias. So it's taking time with your team to imagine, even if it's tough now, what could go right, not just what could go wrong. And again, the studies show that the more a group of people is focusing on a shared positive outcome, the more likely that outcome is to happen. So again, that's something teams could do. The fourth concept is called analytic versus empathetic network. So if you think about Myers-Briggs, we all have preferences for
Right.
thinking or feeling, right? So this was great. These are that we have an analytic network. When we're in that, important for change, we're dealing with timelines, analyzing data, problem solving, very important. When
Yeah.
we're in the empathetic network, that helps us respond to the human cues, but it's also where innovation comes from, right? So people can step back from all the details and the minutia and see the big picture. The kicker with this one is when we are in one, it actively suppresses the other. So we
Wow.
can't be in both. Exactly. And so most organizations reward people for the analytic network activities. So for leaders to lead change, they have to be able to toggle between the two. And the last concept, so I don't forget, I want to make sure I get this right, is called switch cost. Switch cost is one of my favorite. And I love when you were talking about the building, right? Trying new habits and building new ways of being. Switch cost is a bit of a paradox because inside our brains, every time we want to make a change, even if we decide to do it, there's a cost. So there's usually some type of dip in productivity. Usually that, and our brain is tracking this unconsciously all the time. Should we make the effort? Is the effort worthwhile? So when you're leading through change, especially if people have been doing something a certain way for a while, this one is like that well-worn neural pathway, with just a fancy word for habit. The longer people have been doing something, the harder it is. So switch cost comes into play is that people need to feel discomfort in order for you to get behavior change,
Right.
right? And so again, your book and getting people in more of a healthy lifestyle, that is
Yeah.
not easy to do. People have to develop new habits. But when we're uncomfortable, our brain starts telling us there's a problem. Problem, don't do this, there's something wrong. So you have to be able to override that and say no. When there's discomfort, it means I'm probably doing things to change my behavior. So in other words, when there's discomfort, there's switch cost, there's behavior change. And so I have in my book tips to manage each one of those and what it means for you as a change leader. But those are fundamentally the main factors I talk about that can really help leaders get buy-in. So I hope that makes sense.
I love how you have a name for all of these things that come up with habit change. And obviously, you're dealing with a lot of people with analytical minds. At the same time, you're dealing with people that are emotional decision makers and change makers. So it's such a wonderful formula for success. And I'm also super passionate about implementing AI right now. So I could see where that comes up from leadership. We've got to implement this, we're going to save money and time, and you're going to come up with all this. Have you seen that happen?
Yes, I think anything that feels like a threat to people. Because this is bottom line when we hear the old adage that we view change as threat. It's 100% true and it's not going to change. It is hardwired into us. The challenge is most of the time people are walking around with that ego. And when I talk about ego, that's the part that's connected to our emotional brain or the amygdala. Now, there is a very important place for that part of ourselves. And I want my ego in place, but I only want it in that 0.0001% of the time when I actually have to be in fight or flight. That's the only time I want the ego front and center. Everything else, I would like my observing self. Unfortunately, most people are operating in a low grade anxiety all the time as their baseline. So they're always coming from that. And when you think about AI, anything that is a threat to people's livelihood, right? Threat to livelihood in our ego doesn't matter what fancy words they put around it. It's a
Yeah,
very short jump
yeah.
for the ego from a change to I'm dead, right? So I'm
I love
changing, I might lose my job, I have to learn something new, I won't do a good job, I'll be destitute, I'm dead, right? And that's what the ego is, that's the role, is to protect us, but it's been given way too much power. And especially now, in general, there's been a ton of change, a ton of uncertainty. People are just hyper activated, which is why
yeah.
it is so important to simply acknowledge that and help people shift. So AI, yes, people are afraid, but that only is true if you have the baseline that AI is going to steal my job, as opposed to, is there a way it can be used to help make me more productive? But that's the responsibility of organizations to position it in a way so it's not as scary for people, which I think they can do.
I love that answer. Thank you so much for that, because I feel like it's just a value add to your life. If you don't see it as a threat, it's not going to replace you. But if you don't adapt it, it will, because your competitors are going to be adapting it. So
Yeah.
I love how you can make change easier. I want to stay on the topic of change management, because it's such an important change management. Everything is changing at such rapid speed right now in our whole world. What are some of the myths that we can debunk on change management?
Oh, that's so good. So the first of all is, again, most leaders I know that change management seems way too complex. So the first thing is your job isn't to make people change. I think in a weird way, deep down, that's what the pressure that leaders are feeling. And so I like to say years of therapy, and I'm still working on that one myself, right? So that's a myth. But what you can do is provide clarity, understand how people are reacting, and remove obstacles. That you can do, you've already been doing. So thinking about the first myth is it's not a whole bunch of extra things you need to do. It's simply how do you tweak, take the best of what you're already doing, because you're already a change expert, use what works, right? And then switch around or slightly tweak the others. Another myth is that you have to be 100% on board with the change in order to lead through it. I
Wow.
think that's one of the biggest myths, that
That's big. That's really big.
that's big. And most of the leaders, again, feel a ton of pressure. And what I like to say is if you're feeling concern or resistance, that's your authenticity. There's a way to use that as a barometer and to also share that with your team, again, thoughtfully. So, for instance, you're having a conversation and your team is struggling, and you sort of say, hey, let's talk about some of the concerns. You can go first and say, you know, when I first heard about it, here were some things going through my mind. So I have some concerns too. How about you all? And people will feel relaxed when they're not going to be labeled change resistor because, right, they have questions and concerns. So I think that's one of the biggest myths, that you can use your own concerns and resistance thoughtfully.
I love how you lead with authenticity and you encourage leaders to lead with authenticity, because just talking to you, it's so obvious that you are authentic. So it's just
Thanks.
a pleasure. I just want to do our last topic, staying with change, just one more question about sustainable change. So do you have any other strategies for sustainable change based on all your massive corporate experience?
Yeah, so I got a front row seat at ADP with the concept of strengths. I kind of did a little eye roll, a little internal mental eye roll when I was first hearing about that, but I saw the power of that and then understanding the neuroscience. So, really sustaining change is two things. One is being really clear about what you're trying to measure in terms of what's in your control as a change leader. The only thing in your control is change adoption potentially, and being able to influence somebody else's decision to buy into the change. That's one. So that's the only thing you're trying to measure, is staying on top of, am I seeing the behaviors that are telling me people are on board with the change or not? And if there's a problem, really having a conversation, not assuming the person is trying to resist or be problematic, but sharing a behavior that you're seeing that's telling you you're not sure. So that's one. Two is celebration. One leader I was talking to said, Elizabeth, people are desperate for good news. And they are.
Oh
So
my
it's
gosh.
right.
Right now? Yeah.
Yes, exactly. So many people at certain levels of an organization just have constant change and they're not seeing or hearing any of the results from their efforts. So it's important for leaders to communicate any type of win along the way and to celebrate that, but to understand many people are uncomfortable with celebration. We're so much, it's too bad, but I think that's part of what's changing. We're so much more comfortable with criticizing ourselves because that ego is always telling us something negative. So this is what we need to do, is train it to say, it's not that something negative isn't there or there isn't another problem to solve. But what we know is when you celebrate success, it's like being able to see that light at the end of the tunnel. It builds resilience along the way. So there's nothing too small to celebrate to give people that good news. And that's one of the ways to sustain it.
I love the focus on strengths and celebrating small wins. Where
Right.
can people find more of you? Because I could honestly talk to you all day, but I know it's a short podcast. Where can
Thank
people
you.
find more of you?
Yeah, so people can connect with me on LinkedIn. It's Dr. Elizabeth Moran, or they can visit my website, elizabethmorantransformation.com.
Wonderful. Well, I will connect with you on LinkedIn. Thanks for being a great guest.
Thanks, Lisa.